Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Gibson. I'm your host today on my podcast, The Strong and the Wise. Some of you may know me already from my podcast, Socialization of Abuse. I'm the actual creator of Norm Therapy, and we have an abuse channel that we talk about 21 different types of abuse around the world, but also we talk about PTSD, uh, educating police, educating educators about de escalation and many other topics. But this particular podcast uh, that you're viewing today is kind of specialized. It's my personal podcast. The Strong and the Wise is designed for strong advice and wise people. And getting this kind of lifelong information and advices out to the people who actually need it. I see a need for people to be given those life lessons that they otherwise should have gotten at an early age, but didn't get it. This is the problem with most people when they make mistakes in life, is that no one ever prepared them for the mistakes or the eventualities of the circumstances in which they find themselves. So I try to do my best in taking notes and talking with my patients over at Norm Therapy and finding out what are the needs of the people. One of our biggest topics when it comes to having successful relationships, believe it or not, is sex. Sex is probably the worst thing that happens to an abuse victim on top of the abuse, because oftentimes they feel raped. Oftentimes the victims feel left out of their own pleasure. Oftentimes they feel used, abused. So let's dive into that topic today. So this is one of those disclaimers up front that this is for adults or people who are having sex. And people are nowadays are having sex at every age. What they're getting out of sex or what they're putting into sex is what we're going to discuss today. And in some parts, we're going to be graphically detailed. And in other parts, we're going to cite some real statistics from different journals and very respected journals around the world. Again, I'm Michael Gibson, and I want you to know that this podcast is dedicated to my patients, but also the general audience today. So, of course, I'm Michael Gibson. I'm your host today. And on my podcast, I've actually created Norm Therapy, as I mentioned earlier. And I wanted to guide you guys over to normtherapy.com and over to abuserefuge.org. In those two websites, you should be able to see that we have trained norm therapists all over the world on 6 continents. And it's an 11-month intense training course plus probationary and an intern period. And our norm therapists are comprehensive, and they help abuse victims of just about every kind of abuse. I'm a global entrepreneur, so this is an opportunity to grow our platform even further as a global entrepreneur. But also, I'm a former U.S. Army Special Forces Green Beret, U.S. Army Ranger, and I have traveled to more than 80 countries in my lifetime, and I've lived in 22. So I try to bring a wealth of experience, but also just knowledge. People provide bastions of knowledge as you travel the world, but also sometimes we avoid listening to the people we should be listening to, and we miss a whole lot of good information that we could possibly apply to our lives. So in my effort to help people, especially my patients over at Norm Therapy, the Strong and the Wise is born. So welcome to today's episode of The Strong and the Wise. And today our topic is the role of sex in relationships in setting the stage. Now, we spend about a third of our lives in bed with our partners. And during that time, many of us often miss the marks in terms of mutual satisfaction. Why? Well, my research and many conversations I've had around the world pretty much denote a certain understanding that most people are focusing on their own climax during sex from start to finish. This is the problem. If you're worried about, in the proverbial sense, coming or climaxing in a relationship in bed with the person you supposedly love or care a great deal about, or just having great sex with, or any kind of sex, then your objective should not just be to have sex and climax. We're not taught that. As a matter of fact, especially in the West, it's taboo to even discuss sex in a lot of areas of our lives. So, from a professional setting today, I want to give opportunity and rise to the subject of sex and what should happen instead of what coulda, woulda, shoulda. So, people are so focused on their own release that they end up missing the bigger picture: mutual pleasure. In fact, a study published by, let me see here, the Journal of Sexual Medicine found that only 55% of men and 50% of women report being satisfied with their sexual lives. That means nearly half of us aren't fully satisfied. What if we shifted our mindset? What if instead of aiming for our own climax, we focused on creating an experience together? I think my patients talk about this more than anything else in our sessions because sexual frustration is a different kind of anxiety and frustration than being hit or talked down to or hurt. As a matter of fact, oftentimes women and men sometimes feel raped in their own bed because of the mindset. So let's look at the common traps. Too often, people approach sex like a race to the finish line. And we all know what that looks like. They're thinking about their own orgasms, whether it's ejaculating during penetration or being penetrated, and they believe they become so overwhelmed by that need to climax that they miss the opportunity to connect with their mate. Oftentimes, people who abuse other people are sexually frustrated. We'll talk about that in another episode, but I'll tie those links together for you later. But let us break this down in this way. If you're only looking for sex, that's all you'll get. But if you're looking for a sexual experience where your partner's pleasure is just as important as your own, everything changes. Studies have shown that couples who focus on each other's pleasure are far more satisfied in their sexual relationships. In fact, research from the American Psychological Association reveals that mutual focus on each other's needs during sex leads to significantly higher levels of both sexual and relationship satisfaction. So now you're talking about in bed and out of bed. Treating sex as a shared experience is very important. You would have to think of sex like you would a vacation or a project at work. When both partners are involved, planning and consideration of each other's needs, the experience is more fulfilling and exuberating every single time. It's not just about getting to the destination, but enjoying the journey together. Couples who engage in sexual empathy, where they prioritize their partner's pleasure, find themselves exploring new ways of connecting emotionally, mentally, and physically. A 2017 study from the Social, Psychological, and Personality Science showed that couples who had sex at least once a week reported higher relationship satisfaction. However, the study emphasized that quality mattered more than frequency. It's the attention to the other pleasures that your partner needs that makes the difference, not how often you have sex. You can have sex every single day, 2 or 3 times a day, but if it isn't fulfilling, you're wasting your energy and time. You're just looking for a climax. And you'll, after hopefully this podcast, you'll grow to understand just how difficult it is to maintain a sexual relationship if you're not focused on the right and key issues. So now, a big part of making this shift is one, communication. And that's where many couples fall short. In a 2017 study published by the Journal of Sex Research, found that 68% of couples struggle with communicating about their sexual needs. With those conversations, couples often feel frustrated or disconnected, which leads to further dissatisfaction in the bedroom. When I talk to some of my patients, they oftentimes tell me how their partner cheated on them. And that brings another psychological factor in because oftentimes narcissists who abuse victims of and survivors of abuse, they're oftentimes engaged in other relationships to satisfy some of their needs they're not satisfying in their relationship that they are, of course, the abuser. But we'll talk about that again. That's a couple podcasts from now, but we'll definitely talk about it in those links. But here's the good news. Couples who do talk about their desires and their experience, they oftentimes realize a 20 to 25% increase in sexual satisfaction, according to the same journal, regardless of how they've been having sex. So if you're not talking openly with your partner about what works and what doesn't, you're missing a huge opportunity for growth. Growing sexually is a very impactful experience. Most people see their sex as mundane and linear, and they don't often look at the multidimensional aspect of sex. They look at get in bed, have some sex, get out of bed, clean yourself, and we're done till the next time. And this experience can be so much greater. Now, let's not forget how stress, anxiety, and past trauma can impact your sexual relationship. A lot of people don't consider that. They think, oh my God, I got the guy or the girl I want in bed and I'm going to have fun and enjoy this sex. And they don't think about their past traumas with sex or with the people with whom they've had sex. I hear from many patients all the time who say that the worst part about their anxiety and stress is that it leads to lousy sex on top of everything else. The American Psychological Association reports that 70% of people say stress affects their sex lives, whether it's lowering their libido, causing performance anxiety, or making them, how should I say, prepared to be dissatisfied. Yes, let's put it that way, that they know they're not going to be able to please themselves nor their partner. So it really sets them up. Stress and, of course, anxiety and any of your past traumas having to do with sex or in terrible relationships will always affect how you have sex with the next person you're with or with that existing person, whether that relationship gets better or worse. So let's go to a few facts before we go into some relationship or some rebuilding sexual satisfaction of that particular trauma or that sexual anxiety. Okay. Add to the fact that nearly 43% of women and 31% of men experience some form of sexual dysfunction during their lives. It becomes clear that external factors have a huge impact on how we connect sexually. When it comes to abuse and trauma, the stats are even more concerning. The National Sexual Violence Resource Center tells us that 81% of women and 35% of men who've experienced sexual abuse or assault oftentimes struggle with intimacy, reporting reduced desire for sex and difficulty for trusting their partner for what some other person or people did to you prior to your relationship. Your new partner pays for it. Survivors of abuse often need time and therapy to heal, but communication and understanding from their partner can help rebuild that trust immensely. This is important. We have to be empathetic in our sexual approach. Most people are not because they're not taught to be empathetic. They're taught to be selfish. Get yours. Did you get mine? Or did I get mine? Did you get yours? Or how did that feel? How do you should know these things and not have to ask. I've talked to a lot of patients, and they made it clear to me that as soon as they hear their partner saying, "Did you come?" they know that there's a disconnect and that they feel left out of their own sexual experience with their partner. This can be devastating. And for those of you who've, of course, experienced trauma, it's important to remember that healing takes time. A study published by the Sexual and Relationship Therapy found that individuals with PTSD, especially those who were abused in childhood, report significantly lower sexual satisfaction significantly lower. PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, or disorder in this particular case, they change the name about every 4 or 5 years. But with patience and, of course, some kind of therapy, even if it's just talk therapy and open conversations, survivors can slowly work towards regaining their trust and intimacy. Intimacy is the most important part of sex, but we oftentimes leave it out. So we have to be careful. And we're going to talk about some practical steps towards improving your sexual encounters. And I'm going to give you some tips and pointers in narrative form without trying to be a pornographic conversation, but to just demonstrate to people that it's doable and possible to create practical steps in improving your sex life. So visualization and everything. Having a candid conversation about sex with your partner is very practical and very useful. Most people fear having these conversations for their fears, or for their inability to articulate sex, or the embarrassment. We've made sex a taboo in most places in the world. And I think that's causing more sexual frustration than anything else. So you have to look outside of yourself and try with your mate, the person you love or like a lot, the person you're willing to give yourself to surrender your body and mind and intimacy to. If you can't have a candid conversation with that person, then something's wrong with that relationship, because communication is everything. So why can't we communicate about sex? So if you don't know how to talk about sex from time to time in this particular podcast, because we don't always talk about sex, we talk about many other things. But in this particular podcast, you can come and you can ask your questions in the comments, and I'll of course try to answer your question for you. Anyway, you have to ask yourself one question when you're about to have sex. Just one question. It's kind of a two-part question. What are my partner's sexual needs and their desires? If you know going in what are your partner's sexual needs and desires, then you're way ahead of the game. You, guys, should be wondering why you've never had this discussion with your partner before. You, women, should be having the same conversation. But from my experience, women most often are ready to discuss their sexual needs as well as their needs of intimacy. You guys have that, I guess, innate gene where you're more likely to discuss it with your mate than he is to discuss it with you. Men are taught to be stoic and strong and don't cry and lack of empathy. We're taught that in a male-dominated society. But that is the furthest thing from the truth. The more sensitive we are and attentive to the needs of our mate, the better off we are. Now, for the sake of this podcast, I'm speaking in the biblical sense of male and female traditional relationship. But just put yourself in any, for whatever gender you identify with, put yourself in any of those circumstances and you'll understand why, because I just can't get into all that because I'd make it too convoluted and you probably wouldn't like it anyway. Anyway, many expectations overwhelm certain types of people. People who have very little sex experience and people who are afraid to have others see them in their raw form oftentimes fail any area of sex as their default setting. So they end up failing all the time. It's just default because no one ever taught them. So I'm going to do myself a solid and you a solid by walking you through a couple of scenarios. And it can get raw, but that's the whole purpose. So you can hear it and psychologize it. But if you are a vibrant woman who cares about your sexual experience, for instance, perhaps you should tell your man or woman, for the sake of this narrative, we're going to speak in those traditional terms, as I said, exactly what you like in the form of conversation and exploration. For example, I would tell my mate in a casual manner that having her open her legs and wrapping them around my throat as I caressingly and thoroughly pleasure her with my tongue and lips would be a great start before foreplay. That would be something nice. But I know that she can take it being said like that. She gets it. That I know. So I can say it that way. I wouldn't just say it across the breakfast table unless she was that kind of, person. And she liked being told how I would like the pleasure across the table at breakfast. But over time and with practice, you learn these things. Many women um, try not to miss an opportunity than most. Women are more in tune to their own sensitivities than men are as a culture. It has nothing to do with what I'm saying here. It has to do with just how things are. Men and women are Venus and Mars, that whole thing. And women just feel differently than men. Rather, here's another way. I would give her a soft kiss on the side of her mouth as I slowly approached her, caressing her cheekbone with my cheekbone, making my way to her lips as I intensely look her in the eyes and kiss her again as she closes her eyes right on top of her eyelid. From there, I take away the visual of me and replace it with the visual of my idea that she's important, that this matters, that me turning her on is a part of the process. I then whisper in a soft tone that I would love to take your legs and wrap them around my throat and tie your kneecaps into a knot. Maybe she can take that. Maybe I can say that to her because I know she gets it. It may rattle other women. This could be seen as funny and joyful and very relaxing if you have that way about you. If not, it could be easily stated that you would very much like for your woman to either stand still as you work your way down her body with your tongue and begin pleasuring her, and just have those two words being said, stand still. Then your actions take over. Another way, I told you this could get raw. You could say, it's just for the sake of a different experience. Tell her that you would love for her to simply lay back and relax. That's it. All of these approaches have certain benefits and drawbacks depending upon the person with whom you're involved. Some people are ready for them. Some people are not. Some people can hear them. Some people take them as pornographic. Some people take them as pleasurable and intimacy. It just depends. But through communication, you find all of this out. Remember, making any of these scenarios work, she has to know that you mean exactly what you say. That you are there to please her beyond the scope of pleasing yourself. This is our problem, men and women. We try to please people to the point of our pleasure and climax and not theirs. This causes many frustrations and breakdowns in the department of intimacy and sex within a relationship. What I tell my patients is you're going to climax anyway. So why not enjoy the journey towards the climax? And more importantly, why not make sure your partner enjoys it as well? If your idea of what you're doing is okay, then you're going to both have fun doing it. However, sexual pleasure is mutual. And by extension, she must be willing, or he, desirous and able to endeavor to do the same to you. Selfish sex is ugly sex. By replacing your mate's idea of what they believe sex to be with the idea that so long as we both are having sex, we should not only enjoy it, but we should also make sure that as a priority, our mate enjoys it more. Give of yourself more to your mate, and they will give of themselves more to you. Premature ejaculations, male or female, are less likely to affect the overall sexual experience if climaxing is secondary. Although extremely pleasurable, it's a great objective to have while having sex, of course, coming. But it shouldn't be everything, nor should be your major focus. Not ever, because it will change the mindset of the activity in itself. Sex is mental more so than it is a physical act. Most people don't know this, but let's talk about that for a minute. The idea got your brain and attitude while having sex is all about enjoying the activity. So pleasing your partner and accomplishing and developing a strong and deeper connection with your partner is paramount. If you are unable to make love to your partner's mind first, then you will definitely fail in making love to your partner's physically. You just will. You will fall short. Even if you're satisfied with the sex, there's so much more room for growth and pleasure if you don't pleasure the partner's mind first. Just like a woman could say in the scenario of the man pleasing her vaginally with his tongue, she could talk about, taking his member and working it over in the way she would say it to him. Since I'm not a woman and I don't do that, I don't want to give any ideas here on this podcast for that, but I think women can leave it up to their imaginations. So if you want your partner to operate in a mental capacity when it comes to sex, then you have to teach people how to treat you. You have to talk to them. Tell them what you want to hear. Baby, honey, my love, or slut, or whatever you call your partner. Whatever you guys are comfortable with. I think that's very important that you determine that with your partner before you try to psychologize sex with your partner. Know what your likes and dislikes are, what your extremes are, what your safe words are if you need one. Know what these kinds of things are first. That way, when you go into it, you can let yourself go and have fun. So you ask yourself, how do you know you're on the right track and doing the right things to achieve some of the issues I've outlined today here in my podcast? When you're answering yourself, you should try to feel whether or not you are desired by your partner. And if your sexual participation is yielding the kind of results, not only that you're looking for, but also those that your partner is seeking as well. Practice, this is the good part, makes perfect. Practice makes perfect. You have to listen to your partner and try never using the word no in bed. It's better to qualify what you like or not instead of coming to a screeching halt in certain activities. Once you say no, you've just shut the door on every fantasy involving that no. Most often, people have no idea about certain things in bed that they are more willing to avoid than to explore. And they don't even know why, other than they think it may hurt or they think it may not satisfy them, but they don't have any experience to the contrary. Try never saying no. Just qualify your no. Like if you teach me, maybe, yeah, we can do that. But have that conversation before you're already in bed, a few times, even if it's uncomfortable to you. But the word no cuts off like an artery in your body. If the artery in my femoral artery in my leg decide to just clog up, then chances are my legs are going to wither away and die. That's what happens to your sex life. A part of your sex life dies. So be careful with the word no. Anyway, this can be very dangerous to your relationship. We discussed all that. And it sets up mental roadblocks for your partners to navigate, which will, of course, disrupt your sexual flow as well as the sexual harmony within your mate. Some people in relationship need are much greater than the other person needs. That's another thing we come in across a lot in our patients is that they have a heavier appetite for sex. They have a heavier appetite for their needs. They need fellatio. They need different kinds of sex, anal, vaginal, caressing. They need long bouts of kissing, whatever that may be. Some people's needs are more than the other person's. So you have to measure those things with one another and talk about them. Make that a part of your conversation. This is why you talk and communicate about what you're looking for and what your partner is not only willing and capable of doing, but, want to do as well. Couples need to be candid and straightforward about their needs, or they will experience sexual frustration, and this may cause many other problems in the relationship, such as cheating, lying, and becoming so dissatisfied that you end up being unhappier for your relationship than happier. So, how can we start shifting the focus in our sexual encounters? First, if I have to give any advice, slow down. Foreplay matters. The idea is to take your time. Sometimes you'll even experiment and focus on the sensations, not just the end results. Studies, and many of them I've quoted today, studies show that rushing the climax is actually counterproductive for long-term satisfaction. Over time, you become disenchanted with that person because of the counterproductiveness of what's going on. Instead, let the experience unfold. If both partners on their partner's pleasures or own their partner's pleasures first, mutual satisfaction become a natural outcome. Because I own it, that my job is to do everything I can to make you ecstatically happy in bed. And your job is to do everything you can to make me ecstatically happy in bed. Chances are we're going to be okay in bed. We're going to be just fine. Or if not, if there's no balance there, I guarantee you, your sexual life will fail or it will never reach its fullest potential. Finally, let's not underestimate the power of vulnerability. Sex isn't just physical, it's emotional and mental. Being vulnerable with your partner, sharing your fears, desires, and anxieties create deeper connections that will make your sex with your mate more fulfilling. If I had to say something, I would say great sex is the byproduct of a strong emotional connection, that's sexual empathy. When both partners focus on each other's needs, not just in bed, but in all areas of your relationship, the entire dynamic improves. Communication, empathy, and I did mention that twice or three times during this podcast. Very important, empathy. And a shift from selfishness to mutual pleasure can transform your relationship. I encourage you to think of sex not as a goal-oriented activity, but as a shared experience where both partners are equally invested. By changing your mindset and focusing on your partner's pleasure, you'll find that life, both in and out of the bedroom, gets better. I wish I could go on and on. I could, and I probably should, but I'm going to be doing these podcasts from time to time. I'm going to be talking about many subjects: how to take a job interview, how to meet people, how to understand certain philosophies and different ideas from around the world, how to understand the political process or the social processes. We're going to endeavor to talk about a lot of things that strong people can do well. And they want to impart this wisdom on you. And I'll be inviting some very strong people that you will know onto the show. And they'll talk about their experiences and how they were catalysts in the lives of people. Sex is probably one of the most experienced activities on the planet, if not the most. So if we're going to be having this much sex on the planet, we should be looking at it in a way that 50% of women, or I'm sorry, in this particular case, it was 61% of women are not satisfied and 50% of men are not. We should be understanding why those numbers are so high. And we should do something about it, and you can. So as a call to action, I want you to go to our abuserefuge.org and take a look at our site and see the kind of abuses that we help people with. But also make a donation while you're there. That is a 501c3 public charity, IRS registered. You can look us up at the IRS. And also the for-profit side, go to Norm Therapy, NORM therapy.com. And if you need sessions or you know someone else who needs sessions for our Norm therapists to get involved, we'll be more than happy. I'm traveling the world right now. I'm raising capital for Norm Therapy Inc., and that's going very well. If you're looking for something that's very useful, do your homework and send me an email to the website over at Norm Therapy, and I'll be more than happy to answer any of your queries. Thank you very much for attending today. Are there any questions? I don't see any questions in the comment area today. This is a small audience, but that's okay too. It's a good thing that we will keep these posted so people can look at them. Normally, we get more views when people look at them for the second or third time. And I look forward to our next show, which will probably be tomorrow or the next day. I don't have a schedule for the strong and the wise yet. I'm just doing them impromptu once my copy is ready. And we'll keep moving from there. Thank you very much. I'm Michael Gibson. You can reach out to me anytime. Go to normtherapy.com or abuserefuge.org to find out more. Remember, The Strong and the Wise is a separate podcast. It's my personal podcast, which I will be growing along with our company podcast, The Socialization of Abuse, and a few other shows that I'm doing with live patients online. Thank you very much and have a great day.